Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at Cape and Krause and CRI for this webinar this afternoon on mission-centered governance. Really excited to share with you this afternoon. And so thank you for investing time, for registering to be a part of this informative content that affects probably all of us on this call, because we're either working with organizations that have boards, we are board members, or somehow we're affiliated and need to know more about them. So this afternoon, the webinar will be around mission-centered governance, some best practices for effective not-for-profit boards. So if you're just now joining us, welcome. And we want to go ahead and get started with the webinar. So with that, let me get to the next slide. If you're looking for CPE credit this afternoon, here are the instructions for that. This afternoon's session is based on one CPE and one CPE 50-minute session of training. There will be no partial credit for this webinar, so please be involved, signed in for the entire 50 minutes. You'll need to sign in to this webinar with your unique link, and you'll need to stay the entire time. There will be 4 polling questions, and you'll need to answer at least 3 of those 4 polling questions to get credit. So it's not just the 3 polling questions, but with that login, you'll need to make sure that you're participating in attendance for at least 50 minutes. The CPE certificates will be emailed to you within 7 days of this afternoon, so be on the lookout for that. And if you have any challenges with any of that, there's an email address, marketing@criadv.com. You can follow up with any questions. And then at the end of this CPE webinar, there will be a CPE survey. We would really appreciate you filling that out and giving us information on how we can improve our processes, etc. So with that, I think we'll move on, to our first. Well, let me give you a little bit of, make sure you're in the right place. I do a lot of flying, and I love it when the pilot gets on and announces, hey, this is the destination we're going to. If that's not where you're planning to go, you might want to get off the plane. So let me make sure everybody's in the right webinar this afternoon. So the program description is this is going to be a healthy mission-focused board is one of the most vital and assets a ministry or faith-based not-for-profit can have. But building and sustaining an effective board takes intentionality, clarity, and strategy. So this webinar, we intend to help you strengthen key relationships within your organization and recruit, orient, and evaluate board members who will help advance your mission. So let's go on to the next slide. And here are the 3 learning objectives at the end of the session today. We hope that it will help you manage critical relationships in your ministry or not-for-profit, and that you view the stakeholders strategically. Recruit and select ideal board members is the second objective, and then the third is to orient and evaluate board members to ensure effectiveness. So let's enter the first polling question. And the first polling question is, how many members are involved in your board of directors or trustees? And so there's 4 options to pick from: fewer than 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 9, or more than 9. So we encourage you to start answering those questions, especially if you're wanting the CPE credit. And by the way, even if you don't need the credit, go ahead and answer these questions, because this is great research that we use for learning and training purposes. And so it's a lot of fun. Again, there are no right or wrong answers per se. In fact, it's not a grade, but certainly it's a good learning experience. So with that, Pat, thanks for joining us. Now I'm going to introduce you in just a second. But again, the correct answers that we would say, and Pat, I'll let you elaborate in just a minute, is the correct or the best optimal is 7 to 9 board members in most not-for-profits. So with that, let me introduce my co-host, my guest this afternoon. And I'm delighted to have Pat McMillan. And hopefully, Pat, are you able to join us?
He wants me to join, but I can't.
Pat, we can hear you.
We can't get our camera unmuted here, Stan.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, Pat, let's go ahead and get going anyways. And while you're working on that, let me go ahead and do a brief introduction of you, Pat. Pat is an author of
Oh
two
boy.
books, Hiring Excellence, Six Steps to Making Great People Decisions, and The Performance Factor. Pat is also the founder and CEO of Triaxia Partners, a former military veteran. And Pat and I have known each other for 20 plus years, almost 25 years, and had the opportunity to work with a variety of not-for-profits and ministry clients together. But I would say Pat has become a dear friend, a coach, a mentor. Pat has also developed an exhaustive board governance manual on a global basis. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along as well. But Pat, there's 17 modules in this training. Pat's been kind and gracious to mentor and coach me through that process of that content. And really from those 17 modules on board governance, we extracted three key ones that we'll be talking about today that we've already referenced. So again, Pat, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Stan. It's good to be here.
So as we get started, Pat, again, just as a reminder, these are really kind of three lessons, the objectives we want to focus on today, Pat. And as you'll recall, we spent some time last summer reviewing this and working on this together. And so these would be three of the core items that we felt were really important for board members to understand. So we'll focus on these today. And again, Pat, I know from your wealth of experience and knowledge, we don't have enough time in 1 hour to really satisfy all of these in a comprehensive manner. Our intent today is really to highlight, to give an overview, to create awareness, and an opportunity to go deeper on these three key items for most not-for-profits and ministries. So with that, let's kind of jump into that second polling question, and then we'll start going deep. Actually, let me back up from that. And I'm going to quit sharing and let's actually talk a little bit first, Pat. So I mentioned that the modules that we have, we talked about these objectives, but then what we really want to do is, as we talk about not-for-profits and certainly in today's culture and environment, let's set the context. There's a lot of not-for-profits, 501c3s or otherwise within America. And there's remind me, Pat, how many not-for-profits are there here in the U.S. that are active?
Well, they're still counting them, Stan, but almost 2 million, 1.8 million is what the current estimated account is, of which about 37, 38% are faith-based, the majority churches, and about 16% of those are parachurch. That's about 110,000 organizations. That's a lot. That's as much as we have in China and India. Those two are very close to us.
Yes, what I think is amazing, Pat, is when we think about roughly 1.8 million not-for-profits in the U.S., and that includes a lot of the homeowners associations and a lot of the small little civic clubs that have very, very small budgets, but they're very important at the local level. But otherwise, we can think about almost 800 of the 1.8 million are faith-based not-for-profits in some manner or another. So within that context, now we have a little bit of a scope of size of this audience, if you will. When we think about, if you will, the market penetration, we think of the vertical, all the different business language that we use. Within that, certainly like a for-profit business, the not-for-profit organizations also have stakeholders. So within a ministry or a not-for-profit context, who are some of these shareholders or stakeholders within this vertical?
There's a lot. I think we start by breaking them into two categories. Internally, we've got our staff, we've got our donors, management, the board of directors. Externally, I'll put donors externally. our volunteers, the government, which says whether we're not for profit or not, society as a whole, uh, the local churches with whom we interface or serve to some extent, the accrediting organizations. In the US, we pay very careful attention to ECFA, for example, and that stamp of approval. The media, hopefully, they're looking for something newsworthy and it's positive at the time. And partnerships with other ministries. So a lot of people are interested in mission success of a not-for-profit.
Absolutely. And again, Pat, thanks for helping define that. And I love the fact that, we're trying to break it down to get to the core topic today and have it in the context of a much broader audience, but, internal, external, and I think, if you're at all associated in the not-for-profit space, whether as a consultant, professional on the audit side, or in management, or on the board, or as a donor or volunteer, we've experienced the various vantage points, the various perspectives, and it's a very broad group. But I think today we really do want to focus on within, that board membership specifically. And I do think there's the elements that they're on the inside, the fact that they're governance and they have a lot of what we would call fiduciary and policy responsibilities. But in some ways, they're also on the outside because many times they're a donor, they're a volunteer, and they're not necessarily on payroll. And so, there's different ways to look at kind of that comprehensively also. But when we think about board members and all these stakeholders, at some point they're all involved because there's this essence that connects them to an organization. It's really around they trust the organization, the activities and the outcomes that that organization's doing. So within that context of this important element of trust, how does trust and board members relate to each other?
Trust in board members. Well, it would seem with this diversity of stakeholders, internal and external, to your point, the one common interest they have, because they've got a lot of conflicting interests, would be they want to trust the organization. They want to trust the organization's character and competence and their concern for the well-being of the people their mission says they will be serving. Stephen Covey years ago put together a metaphor called a trust account, where we make deposits of trust or withdrawal, and trust accounts can get overdrawn or closed. So they ask, are our programs aligned with our missions? Are our processes efficient? Do the staff and leadership reflect spiritual health? Are we following the law? Are we ethical? That's the board responsibility to provide that oversight, that accountability, and that assurance to the stakeholders. And too many boards are often surprised that the trust account is overdrawn or closed when they read it in the newspaper. And so that's a primary element of the board. Do we know who our stakeholders are? Do we know their primary expectations of us? And are we paying attention to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're saying is so important because a lot of times there's not adequate clarity around, the difference is between board and the paid leadership inside. You and I refer to it frequently around governance versus management and the clarity on these roles. And having that clarity is really foundational to developing trust and maintaining that trust of who's responsible for what. So, what are some of the other things that you would see board members are responsible for? And once we understand that context of their responsibility, it will really help us go deeper into the core items we want to talk about today.
Say that one more time, Stan.
Yeah, so I'm thinking specifically, what would be some of the unique responsibilities of board members to help establish, maintain that trust? So we talked about making sure on the deposits are being made and not too many withdrawals as an organization, but certainly the board is going to be responsible, as in a couple of examples of adhering to legal and governmental requirements.
I think the board has got to ask itself, First of all, do we even know who our stakeholders are? And who are the primary ones? And what are their major expectations? For example, I mentioned ECFA. If a U.S. not-for-profit fails to get that indicia on their letterhead, they're going to have a very difficult time with major donors or foundations that pay attention to such things. If they fail to adequately and accurately complete their Form 990 every year, they may get at risk with someone calling the IRS, because the IRS depends on public notification, and saying, I think there's something awry with this organization. So that the board needs to delegate to the staff the task of identifying those various stakeholders, their expectations, what trust relationships look like, and monitor that we're maintaining that level of trust. The board needs to hold the management accountable, including both through monitoring and reports that we're doing well. The key for a board and a not-for-profit is not to get surprised by a major stockholder or stakeholder, media, government, major foundation or donor. It's we've got a lot of war stories of organizations that were caught in such a situation. For example, in the 1980s and 90s, Red Cross lost in many of their units 50% of their donations where the board failed to provide needed oversight.
Yeah. Yeah, my guess is we can all think of, not-for-profits in our local communities or nationally, and that's a regular occurrence. And by the way, Pat, let me just expand. We frequently talk about the IRS and the 990s and the compliance there, but let me add in Social Security, certainly Department of Labor, and a lot of these other, three-letter acronym government agencies that also have a lot of compliance requirements that we don't always fully understand or appreciate. I think there's another stakeholder, Pat, that we've not really talked about a lot yet, because many times, even though they are the focal part of the organization, they tend to be invisible otherwise, and that would be the constituents who are receiving the services. So it could be internationally, those receiving the services. If you're an evangelism organization, a mission group, and you're providing the gospel message, or if you're providing social services here in the U.S., if you're maybe a homeless shelter or some kind of an advocate for the disenfranchised, we tend to provide services to them, but we don't always see them as a stakeholder to understand how would this be impacted there. And so that, again, we would summarize that, Pat, as program related, right? But making sure that's provided proper oversight there.
Stan, that's exactly right. When it comes to those constituents, the board's got to ask several questions. What do they value or need? And how do we know? Yeah. And are we providing it? And how do we know? And very often we find that programs of not-for-profits are out of alignment with mission. Mission says, why are we in existence? Well, it's to serve a group of constituents, to provide this or that. We often have programs that are doing neither. And the board needs to be alert. They need to be knowledgeable. They need to have means to monitor that, and they need to have the courage to hold management accountable to deliver that.
Absolutely. And Pat, I'm going to what I call throw a hand grenade over the wall and then run really quick, because we're not going to address it, but I don't want to ignore it. But the board has a really important role in providing oversight on the culture of the organization, but in particular, providing the accountability and the oversight and the care of its primary leader, its CEO. What we would call the link between the board and management is that CEO. And certainly the CEO is responsible for the culture and the well-being of all of its staff and leadership. But that linkage comes back through the CEO to the board, and then the board, does have a responsibility to ensure the wellness of its CEO and the distributed impact, if you will, across the leadership. So a topic for another day that we can talk about, but I don't want to miss that piece of the responsibility with then again drawing together all these stakeholders into kind of this next conversation. So, given this context around trust, and we've talked about the importance of the board and this as a specific stakeholder, what can we or what can board members do to build trust and become more effective in the boardroom specifically?
First of all, I think that it would be very helpful for board members to get out of the boardroom and into and visit the field, so to speak, where the program's being delivered. Who are these constituents? What do they need? What does it look like out there, down there on the what we call the critical event level, out there on the front lines? Uh, Secondly, they need to have the systems that allow management to monitor and report back to the board that things are fine out there. Um, to your point, it's all done through the executive director.
Yeah.
He or she is the linking pin. He or she is the only employee of the board, and he or she recruits and oversees the rest of the organization. And so maintaining a high integrity, transparent, accountable, and supportive relationship with that executive director is absolutely critical. If it gets broken or gets water in the pipe or the lines and the message gets staticky, the board loses its ability to watch what is going on out there, and that's when they get in trouble.
Absolutely. Well, Pat, I want to keep this conversation going, but let's take a break real quick and let me launch the next polling question for us. And so while we're doing that, feel free to let me go ahead and read the question. Let me actually drop this so you can see it. How have most of your board members come to their positions? And so this is again research for us. Have the board members with the organizations you serve or you're working with? Are they long-term involvement with the organization? Is it a referral from another board member? Is it reputation in the community? Or did they pursue a position with you? Did they come asking you, I want to be a board member at your organization? So take time to answer that. And Pat, let's go ahead and talk about that for just a minute while our attendees are answering that question. Any response to any of these responses? Insights?
On poll number 2, I don't see the responses yet.
No, but these would be the 4 answers. Which one would you pick, or which one would you say is not a good one, if any? Are they all equal? Can you see the polling question?
I think that long-term commitment to the organization would be a strong one. That means you know it and you've got a passion about their mission. I think that that I've got a phone going off in my. Oh, I got it. I'm sorry. The staff member just left the room and left their phone behind. I apologize. Referring from another board member is also pretty good. Reputation of the community is helpful. They pursued the position with us is probably hopefully because they know you and your reputation in the community and they got a reference. Those are all good responses. It's sure a good place to start finding board members.
Okay, very good. So we talked a little bit about, we're starting to talk a little bit about trying to get the right culture, the right people there. But as part of that, within the boardroom, Pat, you and I have talked about this at length in different settings with different clients. There's a key aspect to building that culture within the board. What's one of those key ideas there?
You know, boards are one of the most unique organizations in the world. They're the ultimate authority in the organization. They have no hierarchy. They don't meet very often. They make the organization's most important, critical, and strategic they, decisions. And I think if you could do anything at a board, it would be to build a culture of collegiality and a culture that allows them to talk straight, to be candid, but in an edifying manner. And the um, I think that would be the critical point as far as build. You've got to have a culture of collegiality because that allows you to, one, have trust, and two, build a very bright collective IQ.
So let me go back to that last statement you just made about having, a high IQ and a collective IQ. You and I have joked about this at length that, having a high IQ is really important in the boardroom, but it's not just the individual IQ.
No, it's a collective IQ.
Exactly. So unpack that for me just a little bit more of why that's so important.
Well, probably one of the most important things for a board is to maximize their collective IQ, their collective wisdom. It's built on the principle that all of us are smarter than the smartest one of us. And boards really don't work together, they think together. And ultimately, that's how they'll be judged. How well did they think together? Are their deliberations and decisions wise, thoughtful, reflective, uh, right for the most part? And what makes that a challenge is that board members are different. They think different. They come from different experiences, and that can create a mess. But on the other hand, the more different a group is, the brighter the collective IQ can become because they surround decisions and problems with different perspectives, experiences, skills, etc. So we're really looking for a board that can take their cognitive, how they think, diversity, and harness it with mission unity and think well together. I think you've got to the more they can do that, and the more they can have candid, straight talk that's edifying, i.e., collegial, those two things together are what really generates a collective or bright IQ. Now, you need three other things. The boardroom needs to be a safe place that allows me to say what I feel is on my heart and mind. It needs to have that collegiality. And Stan, it needs to have a priority of prayer. I can't tell you the number of ministry-oriented board member meetings that I've been in. I think of one or two in particular where it was clear we were stuck. And the chairman or somebody else around the table said, let's pray. So having an attitude and a propensity for prayer is absolutely critical. Safe environment, collegiality, a heart for prayer, cognitive diversity, and straight talk. That's the recipe.
Pat, I couldn't agree with you more. You and I both worked with ministries and not-for-profits where you see it working well, and you also see the dysfunction where it's not going well. So with that, certainly a couple of things that I want to highlight as we go along as well. Within the board room, are all board members equal? Or I mean, there's a board chair and there's committee chairs, and yet are they all equal? Is there a hierarchy? Is it
Yeah.
flat? And I know that I'm taking you a little bit off topic here, but this is a critical piece to make sure we understand.
Well, with the exception of the title executive chairman, which is not often used in today's world, there is no hierarchy in the boardroom. The board does not report to the chair. The
Okay.
chair is not the first among equals. He or she is just one more person around the board table that has the role of being facilitator. A great metaphor for what a board chair should do would be to shepherd, lead the board, but not manage the board and not govern the board. The CEO does not report to the chairman. The CEO reports to the board collectively. And if we ever figure out how to do that right and what that means, we'll take giant leaps forward. We've been discussing it for almost 500 years. And so that would be my take on that. That's a great question to ask.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. And again, I wanted to throw that in just as a, again, one of those hand grenades to run and throw and run. But certainly I would say that there's a lot more to cover than we can cover today. I just wanted to highlight a few pieces of the expertise that you've been able to share and I've been able to glean over time. So we've talked about how important the diversity is of the board members and the fact that really they're all equal. It's a level playing field. One person is responsible for the agenda and facilitating the discussion, but they're not the first among equal. I love the way you stated that. Um, so how then do we get this collegiality and if we're looking for this diversity and yet figuring out how to work together, how does an effective board find that right level of diversity and wisdom and mission commitment and collegiality? And I mean, how do you recruit all these board members?
Yes. Well, I think that a couple of thoughts come to my mind, and I'm taking time into consideration. First, it's important to see recruiting board members as an ongoing, long-term, never-stopping process versus an event. I see too many board member replacements looking more like a volunteer fire department putting out a fire than someone that says, let's go to the next person on the list. I think, secondly, the board needs to discuss and come to consensus on a relatively short 6 to 10 list attributes or qualities they look for in every board member: mission alignment, spiritual maturity, fairness and objectivity, etc. And that list doesn't need to be revised all the time, but that's the list we take when we look for and source board members. We're looking for someone that meets those criteria. And I think that when it comes to the actual recruiting process, we take our list, and our job is to go find men and women that look amazingly similar to that list. We'll look at an existing list of potential candidates that we keep collecting over time from all sorts of places and sources. We might sometimes have to go over a targeted recruitment, looking specifically for someone with an accounting background. And I might call you up and say, Stan, we need somebody for this. Or thirdly, we reach out to key stakeholders, donors, foundations, key members of the community that know and appreciate what we're doing and also know and are networked with people that look similar to that list. That's top of mind what I do.
So Pat, consistent with that, and of course you know me well enough that I think in spreadsheets. And so I've really benefited over time of working with organizations there is no one template, okay? Every organization has its own unique attributes that are really important to understand, but there's some common principles that I have found to be effective in helping to identify the diversity and all the elements we've already talked about without revisiting those. Mm-hmm. You can create a spreadsheet that you can actually look at the diversity of the group and what you're looking for, along with the non-negotiables. And then you say, hey, we need these 1, 2, 3 items that are non-negotiable. It's a non-starter if they don't have these, and which could be mission alignment and engagement with your organization, et cetera, to start with. But then if you're wanting the diversity of thought beyond the missional alignment and the core values alignment and maybe faith alignments, if within certain religious theological tracks, I love working with organizations where they'll create a spreadsheet that says, hey, how many males versus females do we have? What are the different age groups that we have? And depending on the kind of service, the kind of organization they have, what levels of expertise do we have or need? Do we need medical doctors or do we need engineers? Do we have accountants? We need X amount of professionals within what we would call those basic business functions. Do we have somebody that has a legal background, a marketing background, an accounting background? And they would sit on different committees, but then you want to make sure you've got the right professionals sitting in on your program side also. So don't only look at the business elements and the risks. And I want to highlight that in particular, Pat, because I've worked with enough boards where in a lot of the board training that I'm doing now, and thanks to you, I'm more aware of, along with others in the firm that have been coaching training. Board members are becoming a lot more aware of their personal liability as a board member. And to say I didn't know or I don't have the expertise is not always good cover. Now, things can be drafted a certain way in certain bylaws, et cetera. And I'm not an attorney and I don't play an attorney on TV and I'm not giving legal advice. But certainly, you want to make sure as a board that you're aware of these are areas of responsibility. And I can focus on the accounting side. To not have anybody on the board with accounting expertise, to not have anybody on your audit, finance, investment committees that understands debits and credits and financial statements, you're you're opening up yourself to liability. But you don't have to know, but you better have somebody on the board that does know. And certainly on the for-profit side, that's been addressed through a lot of legislation and guidelines. But not-for-profits need to consider the same thing. But moving on, um, what are some of the other items that we would look at? So, we talked about some of the non-negotiables. I've added in a spreadsheet that identifies age groups and, maybe different cultures, maybe alumni of an institution or former beneficiaries. There's so many ways to look at it to really make it unique to the organization. But as we identify who's there and we identify who we need, what's the next step? How do we really focus on making wise selections? How do we have a thorough process to say, this is what we need, and this is how we go about finding these board members, i.e., moving into that whole recruitment side?
Uh, well, let me see if I can do it the short version.
Okay.
I could give you a book on it, but let's see if we can do it in a couple of sentences. First of all of this needs to be on a list, period. In fact, if you look at scripture, that's one of the primary ways people are chosen. Jethro told Moses, go choose 70 people that meet these qualities. Paul told Titus and Timothy, go find some leaders that meet these qualities. So we've got this list of qualities. So we've got candidates. We'll come back to that maybe if we have a few moments. We've taken them through an initial screening, and first of all, do they have the must-haves? If they don't, they're off. We don't take them any further. We do that with graciousness because we're trying to build a friend for the ministry. They may not make the board, but they could be a major donor in the future or a friend, an ambassador for the ministry. Number two, we have introductory conversations, and we're getting to know them, and we're checking the box against the criteria, against those lists of qualities. But then we have additional meetings, longer lunches, more breakfast, exposure to more board members, again, against the list. They don't see the list, although I've found it's very helpful to send the list of potential candidates, say, this is what we're looking for. They often will deselect, saying, that's not me. And I think one of the big ones that's not referenced or used a lot is referencing. We're never going to find really a person's character, their spiritual maturity, a lot of the important non-negotiable stuff from an interview. Bill, are you an honest man? Oh, absolutely. Well, let's check with his wife or his pastor or his coworker. So character issues, spiritual maturity, references make a lot of difference. And then multiple meetings. Notice multiple meetings, referencing, interviews, all against the list, holding these candidates up against the attributes, not against each other. And time and repetition, conversation and discussion among board members, and lots of prayer. It's not in Satan's best interest that we get good board members on a faith-based ministry.
Pat, I couldn't agree more. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and launch the next polling question. So, what do you think is your board's greatest strength? And again, you've got four options to pick from. There is no one right answer, but we always love to study what's going on in the faith-based not-for-profit communities and what the results are. But so, Pat, while the people are answering that, let me add to what you're saying. And again, we talked a lot more about this in some of our other sessions, Pat, that we'll talk about here in the next few minutes. But another way to recruit is to, if you have standing committees, is to invite advisors, guests to be on those committees where you can observe them and see how they perform, meaning how do they function? How well do they coalesce? Are they collegial? Are they adding value to the conversations, etc.? Um, and then, they get a chance to observe the organization and the risk factors and, is this something they're really committed to? Do they have the time commitments for, etc.? And so you may want to think, use that as part of the approach of recruiting board members by bringing them into certain committees as a trial run. Now, I will say, with that caveat, you need to be very aware of your state and certain requirements of who can be on a committee and who cannot be, because different states do have legislation around who can serve on which committees. In particular, your audit and finance committees tend to be more heavily governed through governmental oversight than others. Certainly, as an organization, you want to be careful who's on your governance committee, which is really at the core, at the heart of the organization. But that would certainly be something to think about. So, Pat, as we continue on, what are some of the important principles that keep organizations out of the many pitfalls associated with these important people decisions?
On the recruiting side?
Yes.
Say the question one more time, Stan. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So we've talked about some of the important principles in keeping organizations out of many pitfalls associated with the important people decisions. What are some of the important items? So, for example, I found that maybe the best person available may not be the right person for the role. Just because they're available doesn't mean they're talented or skilled or have the time. Uh, Again, you and I have talked about focusing on somebody's strengths in a particular role and recognizing they may have weaknesses, but we're not going to need them in those roles of weakness. We're looking for the areas of strength. What are some other things that you would highlight?
Well, quickly, avoid the binary trap. Don't get caught in a yes or no alternative with one candidate. That is one of the biggest pitfalls with people decisions. The Pharisees were constantly trying to put Jesus in a binary trap. Should we stone the woman or not? Yes or no. Should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Yes or no. Well, the same thing applies to a board decision. Shall we hire or bring Bob on? Yes or no. It would be better what's the best one between Bob, Susan, Gail, and George. So avoid the binary trap. Number two, maybe accept almost fits. There are no perfect fits. So once you get past the non-negotiable, almost fits work very well. Past behavior is the best indicator of future behavior. So if they weren't a good board member for organization A, it's really going to be unlikely they're going to come to your board meetings when you bring them on board. Always compare the candidate to the criteria, the qualities, the list, not each other. When we do it against each other, personality wins all the time, even though they might not make it against the list. Finally, the best time to fire someone is just seconds before you hire them. It's very, very difficult to move a board member off the board. We don't do that well. We keep waiting for the term limit to be up, and then we chicken out and give them another term. And so just keep in mind that the process, the hiring process, is really important. Mark Twain was fond of saying it's easier to stay out of the problem than to get in the problem, or easier to stay out of the problem than to get out of the problem. So hire well, and those pitfalls will help you.
Yeah, and absolutely, Pat. That applies to board members. It's not, we talk about, the best time to fire somebody is before you hire them, but even with the board, within a board setting, before you invite them onto the board, make sure they're the right fit, because most boards have at a minimum board classes where, they have X amount of years of service before rotation, and some have, you're on indefinitely. And once that happens, that's really hard and disruptive to ask somebody to step off.
Yeah.
So, as we've talked about, this important role of the board and identifying the roles and responsibilities, we've also talked a little about trying to recruit that ideal board member and creating that criteria that's very unique to the organization. And it's what I would call the life cycle of that organization, that ministry. Let's talk a little bit about, hey, now we've said we do have that right person, and we're starting to run out of time. I'm watching the clock here, Pat. So the preacher in me is getting long-winded here, and so we'll need to start wrapping this up. But let me at least pitch this idea that certainly there's this orientation process, maybe speak to in just a few minutes, and then there's the evaluation process. So one is getting them up and functioning quickly, and the other is then maintaining effectiveness. What can you tell us about that in a few minutes?
Stan, I'm so sorry, but the sound is coming in and out. Say that question one more time.
So the question is, let's talk briefly, just a high level, about the importance of onboarding and orienting board members quickly, as well as then the evaluation process to ensure that there's proper performance, if you will, or effectiveness of each board member, because every board is only as effective as its weakest link. So we can't unpack it deeply, but let's at least address it really high level.
I'm going to stay at a high level. I'm going to focus on onboarding. So many problems could be avoided by effectively onboarding a high potential board member, but it's seldom done in the not-for-profit world well. First, I'm just going to give you a few of a list of maybe 10. I'll give you two. Make sure they feel welcome. I can't tell you the number of times people walk in, they say, this is Bob. Bob's going to join the board. Everybody says, hi, Bob, and off they go. Now, Bob, pay attention, listen, watch, and learn, and you'll get this. In a year or two, you're going to be an effective board member. Make sure they feel welcome. Engage them. Secondly, that ongoing process needs to be intentional, thoughtful, and visible. You don't have a lot of time to onboard. You don't meet that often. You don't want them to take 3 board or 4 board meetings to get a handle on how we do things around here, because then their term is 33% up. You want to get them done fast. Here's an illustration, a great metaphor. How fast do you want to get your board members in the air? A Boeing 747 takes 10,000 feet to take off. A Navy F-35 takes 285 feet with a steam catapult coming off the Abraham Lincoln. 10,000 feet to get in the air, 285 feet in less than 2 seconds to get in the air. How fast do you want your board members to get in the air? And that orientation process, if it's thoughtful, intentional, well executed, is like an F-35 in contrast to a 747. And that one thing will make board orientation or board evaluation and discipline considerably easier, less frequent, and much more pleasant if we can onboard, if you do a good job selecting them and a good job onboarding them.
Pat, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm watching the clock here, so I need to probably launch this next polling question. So while that's playing out right now, and what's your biggest challenge in recruiting new board members? Is it articulating the profile of a person? Is it finding someone willing to commit the time? Is it even knowing where to begin? And how often we have to recruit new board members? Are you have to do it frequently, or you do it so infrequently, you just don't have a lot of practice or experience. So as you're answering that, Pat, I would certainly agree, onboarding sooner than later. I love working with boards where they actually have an orientation packet. It may be that before the first board meeting, somebody on the board who's good at training or has history will spend maybe half a day in advance to get them onboarded with written materials in advance as pre-reads, and then some quality time to answer questions, review things before the board starts, and then certainly as we start winding things down, ongoing beyond just getting a board member up to speed as quickly as possible and functional and effective also helps with retaining them. If they feel like they're valued, that they're contributing significantly quickly, they're more likely to stay because, again, they're volunteering their time and they want to know that they're making a difference, not just wasting time. And I think some of the boards that have some of the best board evaluations, some boards do self-evaluations, others do self-evaluation along with peer evaluations. Some are far more comprehensive. There's some great approaches to all of those items. Certainly is a really, really important piece. So hopefully, again, you will have answered the polling question. That was polling question number 4 for your CPE credit today. But as we start wrapping up our time today, Pat, we've had a couple questions come in that I've kind of saved for here at the end, knowing that we were going to run out of time. But yeah, I thought, no, let's honor those who've stayed with us the entire time. And so John asked a question about, just subject to state laws, or, maybe I'm going to make it more general, federal, state, or local. Are board members personally liable for poor governance and lack of discipline? And I would say absolutely. And we see that in a variety of contexts where there's been mismanagement, misconduct. And I don't need to say anything. You can just read it in the news or Google and see how boards have been impacted personally by either neglect and or ignorance. Ignorance is not a viable excuse to diminish that personal liability. Certainly there's, that corporate body liability, but we have seen where individuals can be personally held liable in different jurisdictions. Pat, any comments on that?
I've sat on a good number of both corporate and not-for-profit boards. In the corporate world, it's much more stringent, clear, and enforceable. The not-for-profit board, less so. You've got to be pretty extreme to get in trouble, but you can get in trouble. The rule of thumb, Delaware law, which kind of actually governs most of it in most states, just by reference, is that what's expected of a board member is what is expected of any reasonable or prudent person in this situation. If I'm a homemaker or a high school gym teacher and I'm on a not-for-profit board and we've got to go over the financials and I don't understand them, a prudent person would ask questions, maybe ask for the CFO to brief them, maybe bring in the outside auditor, but they wouldn't sit there and vote on things they didn't understand. They would have to take the initiative to get it as best they could along the lines of any prudent or person. Yeah. Board members, not in the not-for-profit world, are expected to exercise duty of care. That means to do the best job you can, duty of loyalty, to do it in the best interest of the organization versus personal interests, and duty of obedience, to do what you can to make sure that they follow the laws, state and federal, their own policies and values. And so you'd have to be an extreme, but we read in the paper every year about boards that seem to creatively take their organizations to the extreme with poor governance. And they do pay a price, almost always just financial. So I'm kind of lined up with Stan on that.
So Pat, as we come to the end of our time together today, thank you again for joining me. I'm going to launch one more slide here real quick as we wrap up today. For those of you who are attending, thank you again for investing an hour of your time this afternoon to join Pat and I on this conversation around mission-focused boards. There's a QR code on the screen now that you can actually go to, and it will take you to the website. And you've heard me allude to it several times in the last hour, but Pat and I actually pre-recorded 3 hours of podcasts in the last few weeks and months. And those are available at this QR code where we go deeper on these 3 topics. We spend right at 45 minutes to an hour on each one of these topics we just talked about and go much deeper. And then in addition to that, Pat and I have co-authored some articles together, and there's a flip book or an ebook available to you that will have a lot of this content in written form as electronically, digitally as a PDF. And then certainly, again, thank you for joining us today. And there will be a lot more opportunities coming up. Let me go to the next slide here. And here's where you can see the references to the video or the podcasts that are available, and then the articles. So please, again, thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions on your CPE, there's information there as well. And Pat, thank you for investing time in so many ministries across the years, and in particular today, with all of our attendees, our guests, our participants, our clients, and our staff. So very grateful for you, Pat, and your work,
Thank you.
your life's work with boards and not-for-profits. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thanks.